Hey guys, welcome back to Fiction Flux. Hope you're all doing well. Now let's get into it. The first time Tamura Shigaraki saw her, she was standing in the rain outside a convenience store, eating a meat bun like it was the most important thing happening in the world. He almost walked past her. Almost. He had been walking past people his entire life. That was what you did when the world had decided you were its enemy, and you had decided the feeling was mutual. You walked past people. You did not look at them. You did not see them as anything other than the specific category of obstacle or tool that the situation required them to be. He walked past her. He got 3 steps. He stopped. He did not know why he stopped. He turned around. She was still eating the meat bun. She had a notebook open on the convenience store windowsill beside her, propped against the glass at the specific angle of someone who had found the optimal reading position in a suboptimal location. She was reading and eating simultaneously, with the complete focus of someone who had not noticed it was raining harder than when she started. She was soaked. She did not appear to have noticed. He stood in the rain and watched a girl be completely in her own world, in a way that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with whatever was in the notebook. He scratched his neck. He told himself he was going to leave. He did not leave. She turned a page. She made a sound, small, involuntary, the specific sound of someone who had just read something that confirmed a theory they had been developing and were pleased about the confirmation. She said, "I knew it." Not to him, not to anyone, just out loud into the rain. He said, "Knew what?" She looked up. She was not startled. That was the first thing he noticed. Most people, when Tamura Shigaraki appeared next to them in the rain with his specific quality of presence, the hands and the face and the red eyes, and the very particular energy of someone who had been at war with the world for as long as he could remember, most people registered the threat before they registered the person. She registered the person first. She looked at him with clear green eyes and said, "The load transfer calculation in the 3rd hero analysis I've been working on. The structural problem I identified last week. It resolved on page 47. He said, "What?" She said, "The notebook. You asked what I knew." He said, "I asked what you knew." She said, "Yes." He said, "You're soaked." She said, "I know." He said, "You don't seem bothered." She said, "I noticed when I got to page 30. I was in the middle of something. The rain didn't seem as important as the something." He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, "You have an unusual number of hands." He said, "Yes." She said, "I'm not going to ask why. You don't look like you get asked things in a way that expects an honest answer." He did not know what to do with that. He scratched his neck. She said, "That's a stress response, the neck scratching." He said, "I know what it is." She said, "I'm not criticizing. I write things down when I'm stressed. It's a similar mechanism, external physical action to manage internal pressure." He said, "You don't know what you're talking about." She said, "Probably not, I don't know you." She looked at the notebook. She looked at him. She said, "Do you want the other meat bun? I bought 2, but I only have appetite for 1 and they're better warm." He stared at her. She held it out. It was wrapped in convenience store paper, and it was warm, and she was offering it to Tamura Shigaraki in the rain, outside a convenience store like this, was a completely normal thing to do. He scratched his neck. He took it. He had no explanation for taking it. He ate it standing in the rain while she went back to her notebook. She said without looking up, "Page 47 if you're curious." He said, "I'm not." She said, "Okay." She turned another page. He stood in the rain. He said, "What's the structural problem?" She looked up. He said, "The load transfer calculation. What's the problem?" She turned the notebook toward him. It was dense with writing and diagrams, hero analysis, tactical frameworks, the specific organized chaos of someone who processed the world through documentation. He looked at it. He said, "This is hero analysis." She said, "Yes." He said, "You're a hero student." She said, "1st year, UA." He said, "And you're showing this to a stranger in the rain." She said, "You asked." He said, "I didn't ask to see classified." She said, "It's not classified, it's my personal analysis. I own it, I can show it to who I want." She said, "Also you took the meat bun." He said, "What does the meat bun have to do with?" She said, "Nothing, I'm just knotting the sequence of events. You took the meat bun and I showed you the notebook. Those were separate decisions that happened in the same general period." He looked at her. She looked at the notebook. She said, "The problem is here. The hero in question uses a redistribution technique that requires 3 sequential support points, but his standard positioning only ever creates 2. I've been trying to figure out if the third is implicit or if there's a genuine gap." She said, "Page 47 says it's implicit. The third support point is his own center of gravity, which he unconsciously adjusts. I missed it because I was looking for an external support." He said, "You're analyzing a hero's weaknesses." She said, "I'm analyzing a hero's technique. The weaknesses are incidental." He said, "Incidental." She said, "They're not my primary focus. I'm interested in how things work. The how things work includes both the strengths and the gaps." He said, "Sounds like something a villain would say." She said, "Or a student who wants to understand the full picture." She looked at him. She said, "Are you a villain?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Okay." He said, "That's it, okay." She said, "What would you like me to say?" He said, "Most people." She said, "I know what most people do. I'm not most people." He scratched his neck. He said, "You're not scared." She said, "I notice things before I feel things about them. Right now I'm noticing." He said, "What are you noticing?" She said, "That you took the meat bun and you asked about page 47 and you're still standing here." She said, "And that you look like someone who has been at war with something for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to not be at war." The rain came down. He did not say anything. She said, "I'm Izumi Midoriya." He said, "I know who you are." She said, "You know who I am." He said, "You're the entrance exam anomaly, highest rescue points in recorded history, enrolled with One for All." She looked at him. She said, "You know about One for All?" He said, "I know many things." She said, "Then you know who gave it to me." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you still took the meat bun?" He said, "The meat bun was separate." She said, "Yes, you keep saying that." He said, "Because it's true." She said, "I know." She closed the notebook. She looked at him with those green eyes that registered the person before the threat. She said, "What's your name?" He said, "Tamura Shigaraki." She said it quietly to herself, testing the sound of it. She said, "Okay, Shigaraki." She said, "I'm going to finish my analysis. You can stay in the rain or you can go. Both options are fine." She opened the notebook again. He stood in the rain for another 4 minutes. He left without saying anything. He walked back to the bar. He sat in his chair. Kurogiri looked at him. He said, "You're soaked." Shigaraki said, "It's raining." Kurogiri said, "You were gone longer than expected." Shigaraki said, "Yes." Kurogiri said, "Did something happen?" He scratched his neck. He said, "No." He thought about page 47. He thought about green eyes that registered the person first. He said, "Get me something to eat." Kurogiri said, "Of course." He sat in the bar and he thought about nothing in particular, and specifically did not think about a girl in the rain, outside a convenience store, eating a meat bun like it was the most important thing in the world. He did not think about this for approximately 3 hours. Then he thought about it. Then he wrote nothing down because he was not the kind of person who wrote things down, and he was not starting now. Then he thought about it some more. He went back 3 days later. Not to find her, he was not looking for her. He was in that part of the city for operational reasons that had nothing to do with convenience stores or notebooks or green eyes. She was there. Different notebook this time. She had the previous one tucked under her arm and a new one open in her hands, and she was standing in the same spot outside the same convenience store, in weather that was considerably better than 3 days ago, and she was writing something with the specific urgent energy of someone, capturing a thought before it became less precise. He stopped walking. She did not look up. He said, "Page 47. She looked up. She said, "You came back." He said, "I was in the area." She said, "Okay." He said, "Did it work? The implicit third support point theory." She said, yes, I tested it against 6 other techniques using the same framework, and it held in 5 of the 6. The 6th has a genuine gap. He said, which hero? She said, why? He said, academic interest. She looked at him. She said, you're not academically interested. He said, you don't know what I'm interested in. She said, you have a specific look when you want information for operational purposes. It's different from curious. He said, you've known me for 20 minutes total. You can't read my expressions. She said, I notice things quickly. It's a skill I've developed. She said, the 6th is endeavor. The gap in his technique is real, but it's compensated by his raw output capacity. You'd need significant force multiplier to exploit it in a live situation. He said, I wasn't going to. She said, I know, but now you know I know. She looked at him. He looked at her. He scratched his neck. She said, have you eaten? He said, why? She said, because you look like someone who eats irregularly and you've been walking for a while. The wear pattern on your shoes suggests high mileage, and the posture suggests either fatigue or a chronic issue with the upper back. He said, you analyzed my posture. She said, I analyze everything, I write it down. He said, how many notebooks? She said, 27 currently, 28 as of this week probably. He said, 27 notebooks. She said, yes. He said, about what? She said, everything, hero analysis, tactical frameworks, quirk mechanics, personal documentation. She said, and some other things. He said, what other things? She said, the question of why things are the way they are, why the system produces what it produces, what the system was supposed to do versus what it actually does. He said, you analyze the hero system critically. She said, I analyze everything critically. Hero system, villain system, commission, institutional structures in general, the gap between what they claim to be and what they actually are. She said, the gap is usually the most interesting part. He was quiet. He said, the villain system. She said, yes. He said, you've analyzed the villain system. She said, Notebook 19, the structural analysis of villain organization in the current era, the incentive structures, the recruitment pipeline, the specific needs the legitimate system is failing to meet that villain organizations exploit. She said, it's one of my longer notebooks. He looked at her. She looked back with the clear eyes. He said, you're a first-year UA student. She said, yes. He said, and you have a notebook analyzing villain organizational structures. She said, Notebook 19, yes. He said, why? She said, because you cannot understand a problem without understanding its full structure. The hero system exists in response to something. Understanding the something is part of understanding the system. She said, also I find things more interesting when I understand them completely rather than from one angle. He said, and the villain angle? She said, is an angle, yes. He looked at the notebook in her hands. He said, what does Notebook 19 say about the League? She said, you know about the League. He said, operational question, academic interest. She said, that's the second time you've used the academic interest framing. He said, because it's true both times. She looked at him. She made a decision he could see happening in real time in the specific quality of her attention. She said, Notebook 19 says the League's structural problem is that its organizational philosophy, the destruction of the current system, does not include a clear picture of what replaces the system. Destruction without architecture produces rubble, not change. She said, it also says the leader's personal motivation appears to be rooted in something more specific than ideological commitment to the stated goals. The ideology is real, but it's secondary. There's something primary underneath it that the ideology is organized around. Silent. He said, how do you know that? She said, the pattern of target selection. The League consistently targets things connected to All Might specifically, and the hero system generally, but the emotional weight of the former significantly exceeds the emotional weight of the latter. The personal exceeds the ideological in the decision data. She said, Notebook 19, Section 4. He said, you wrote Section 4 about me. She said, I wrote Section 4 about the League's leadership profile, based on observable data. I didn't know who the leader was until you told me your name 3 days ago. He said, and now? She said, now the profile makes more sense than it did. He said, explain. She said, you had a specific beginning. I don't know what it was, but the anger you carry is personal before it's political. The personal came first. The political is the structure you built around the personal to give it scale and direction. She said, that's not a criticism, it's a structural observation. He said, it sounds like a criticism. She said, I know. Personal origin stories for large-scale movements usually sound like criticisms when you say them out loud. The person inside them experiences them as the most justified thing imaginable. Both things can be true. He stood in the street outside the convenience store. He had been planning to be somewhere else 8 minutes ago. He said, you're not afraid of saying that to me. She said, should I be? He said, most people. She said, I know what most people do. You said that last time and it was true last time. She said, I'm not most people, I told you that too. He said, you're consistent. She said, yes. He said, annoyingly consistent. She said, I've been told that before. He scratched his neck. He said, the meat bun thing, did you do that on purpose? She said, I had a spare meat bun. You were in the rain, the logic was direct. He said, you weren't trying to. She said, to what? He said, to make a point, or to be kind specifically, to perform kindness. She said, no, I had a spare meat bun. You were there, that's the complete sequence of events. He said, most people don't give villains meat buns. She said, most people don't analyze villain organizational structures in Notebook 19 either. I'm working from different premises than most people. He looked at her. He said, what are your premises? She said that understanding something is more useful than fearing it, that the gap between what things claim to be and what they are is where the actual information lives, that people are more interesting and more complicated than the category they've been placed in. She said, and that spare meat buns should not go to waste. He said, that last one. She said, it's foundational. Something moved in him that was not a feeling he had regular access to. He scratched his neck. He said, I have to go. She said, okay. He said, the Section 4 observation, about the personal preceding the political. She said, yes. He said, you're not wrong. She said, I know. He said, I didn't say I was going to do anything about it. She said, I didn't ask you to. He said, I'm just. She said, you're just telling me I'm not wrong. He said, yes. She said, okay. She wrote something in her notebook. He left. He walked back to the bar. He sat in his chair. He thought about premises. He thought about the gap between what things claim to be and what they actually were. He thought, for the first time in a very long time, about what was actually underneath the ideology. He thought about what the Notebook 19 Section 4 profile said about him. He thought about it being accurate. He sat with accurate for a long time. It was not a comfortable thing to sit with. He sat with it anyway. The third meeting was not at the convenience store. He had not planned a third meeting. He was not planning meetings. He was Tamura Shigaraki, the leader of the League of Villains, the inheritor of All for One's Will, the architect of the current hero system's destruction. He was not planning convenience store meetings with UA first years who had too many notebooks. He was also, somehow, in the park 2 blocks from the convenience store on a Thursday evening, when he was absolutely not looking for anyone. She was on a bench. Notebook open, pen moving. The specific quality of someone who was working through something difficult, because the pen speed was slower than usual and there were more crossings out. He sat on the other end of the bench. She said without looking up, the bench is long, there's space. He said, I know, I picked this end specifically. She said, I know, you maintain a consistent distance, about 2 meters, you've done it both previous times. He said, you measured. She said, I notice things. He said, that's a surveillance skill. She said, it's an observation skill. Surveillance has intent, I just notice. He said, you're crossing things out a lot. She said, I'm working on something difficult. He said, the hero analysis. She said, no, something else. He said, what? She looked up. She said, the question of whether the system I'm training to operate within is actually capable of doing what it claims to exist for. or whether the structure is so compromised by its own contradictions that the best version of operating within it is not enough. He said, "That sounds like something I'd say." She said, "I know, I've been thinking about that." He said, "That you sound like me." She said that the question sounds like something you'd ask, and wondering what that means. He said, "What does it mean?" She said, "I don't know yet, that's why there are crossings out." He looked at the notebook. He said, "Can I see?" She turned it toward him. He read. The writing was dense and honest in the way that things were honest when you were not planning for anyone to read them. She had written about the Commission and the way the Commission made decisions and what those decisions prioritized. She had written about the gap between the hero system's stated mission and its operational reality. She had written about the people who fell through the gaps and what falling through the gaps cost them. She had written, "I want to be a hero because I know what it is to be someone the system did not include. I was quirkless for 15 years. The system had no category for me. I know what that costs. I want to be the person who shows up for the people the system missed." She had written, "But what if the system structurally cannot do that? What if showing up within the system is a different thing from showing up for the people the system missed because the system's structure specifically deprioritizes those people?" She had written, "What do you do when the institution you're training to serve is less than its mission?" He read it twice. He handed it back. He said, "You know the answer." She said, "I don't." He said, "You wrote it, the what do you do question. You already know the answer you're afraid of." She looked at him. He said, "You either accept the limitation and work within it, or you build something better. Those are the options." She said, "Building something better sounds like what you're trying to do." He said, "Yes." She said, "But your version of building something better involves destroying first." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you haven't fully mapped what comes after the destroying." He said, "Section 4. She said, "Yes." He scratched his neck. He said, "What would you build?" She said, "I don't know yet. I'm on notebook 27 and I don't have the full answer." He said, "But you have directions." She said, "Yes." He said, "Tell me one." She looked at the park around them. She said, "A system that doesn't require one person to be the load-bearing element. The hero system has been organized around All Might for a generation. One person as the structural center means the whole thing is vulnerable to what happens to that one person." She said, "You know that. You built your entire strategy around it." He said, "Yes." She said, "Which means you also understood the structural problem before I articulated it." He said, "I understood it as a weakness to exploit." She said, "I'm understanding it as a design flaw to correct." He said, "Different applications of the same observation." She said, "Yes." He said, "What else?" She said, "A system that addresses the conditions that produce the things it's trying to address, not just the things themselves. The hero system responds to threats after they form. The conditions that produce threats go largely unaddressed." He said, "I know someone who would agree with that." She said, "The leg." He said, "A specific member." She said, "Tell me." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because you're telling me things. You've been telling me things across 3 meetings, and I've been telling you things back, and that's a pattern that suggests we're both getting something from the exchange that we're not getting elsewhere." He said, "And you want to know what that something is?" She said, "Yes." He said, "For the notebooks." She said, "For the notebooks, and for understanding." He said, "Those are the same thing for you." She said, "Yes." He looked at the park. He said, twice, the specific member. He was a person the system failed so completely that the failure changed the structure of his reality. He said, the League exists partly because of people like him. People the system didn't have a category for, and whose lack of category cost them everything. She was quiet. She said, and the League gave them a category. He said, yes. She said, belonging. He said, yes. She said, that's a real thing it provides, regardless of the ideology. He said, yes. She said, that's in notebook 19. He said, I know, you said. She said, the system failing specific people who then organize around their failure, that's predictable. The League is partly a structural output of the hero system's specific gaps. He said, and if you corrected the gaps? She said, the conditions that produce organizations like the Leg would be different. He said, "You're saying I'm a structural output." She said, "I'm saying the conditions that produced you are structural. The personal thing that came first, I don't know what that is. I know the structure that surrounded it." He said, "And the personal thing?" She said, "Is yours." He said, "You're not going to ask." She said, "No." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because some things belong to the person they happen to, and because you'll tell me or you won't, and pushing is not the right mechanism." He scratched his neck. He said, "How do you know what the right mechanism is?" She said, "I observe, I write things down. The right mechanism is usually the one that doesn't require the person to do something before they're ready." He said, "And if they're never ready?" She said, "Then they're never ready, and that's information too." He was quiet. She wrote something in the notebook. He said, "What are you writing?" She said that the League provides belonging as a structural function, and that this is a real need it meets regardless of the ideology surrounding it. She said, and that the person sitting next to me is more complicated than the category he's been placed in. He looked at her. She said, "That's in here now." He said, "I'm in your notebook." She said, "You have been since the meat bun." He said, "What does the entry say?" She said, "It says that you took the meat bun and you asked about page 47, and you came back and you've been honest in the exchanges in a way that most people aren't, and that the anger you carry is real, and so is something underneath the anger that I don't have a name for yet." He said, "What does the something underneath the anger feel like from where you're sitting?" She said, "It feels like someone who has been told a story about themselves for so long that they're not sure where the story ends and the actual person begins." He did not say anything. The park was quiet. She said, "I'm not saying this to change you. I'm saying it because it's what I observe and I write down what I observe." He said, "Even when it's uncomfortable?" She said, "Especially then." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because the comfortable observations are usually the less accurate ones." He sat with that. He said, "The story I was told." She said, "Yes." He said, "I've been living inside it for a long time." She said, "I know." He said, "It feels like it's mine." She said, "Stories that start early feel like that." He said, "Did you have one?" She said, "Quirkless, for 15 years. The story was that I was nothing, that people like me didn't have a place, that wanting what I wanted was a kind of delusion." He said, "And?" She said, "And I had 15 years of that story, and then someone looked at me and saw something different, and the story started changing." He said, "All might." She said, "Yes." He said, "He changed your story." She said, "He offered a different one. I chose it." He said, "It was that simple." She said, "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Simple and hard are not the same." He scratched his neck. He said, "The story I was told." He stopped. She waited. He said, "It was told to me by someone who had his own story, his own version of what the world was and what I was supposed to be in it." She said, "All for one." He did not confirm it, but he did not deny it. She wrote something. He said, "You're writing that down?" She said, "Yes." He said, "You're writing down that All for One gave me my story?" She said, "I'm writing that you might have been handed a story that belonged to someone else's war, and that you've been fighting someone else's war for so long it became yours." He was very still. She kept writing. He said, That's not." She said, "I know it's not comfortable." He said, "It's not accurate." She said, "Is it not?" He said, "I chose this. I chose the leg. I chose the mission." She said, "Yes, you did. After you were given a specific context for what the world was, and what your role in it was, and who your enemies were, and why they deserved what they had coming." She said, "You chose within that context. That's real choice, but the context was given." He said, "Everyone gets a context." She said, "Yes, and some contexts are more accurate than others." He said, "Are you saying mine is wrong?" She said, "I'm saying it might be incomplete." Silent. He said, "Incomplete." She said, "You can have a real grievance and an incomplete picture of the world simultaneously. Those aren't contradictory." She said, "The hero system has real failures. The things you're angry about are real things." She said, "And there are also things that don't fit the picture you were given, things that the picture doesn't account for." He said things like what? She said, like people who are trying to fix the failures from inside, like the gaps in the system being structural rather than intentional, like the possibility that destroying the system produces conditions that are worse for the people you're ostensibly trying to free than the system itself. She said, Notebook 19 has a section on post-destruction scenarios, the historical record on what happens to people at the margins when the structures around them are removed without replacement is not encouraging. He said, you studied that. She said, I study everything. He said, and the conclusion. She said, destruction without architecture produces rubble. I told you that the first time. He said, you told me that to describe the League's strategy. She said, yes, and now I'm telling you it's not a criticism of the goal. It's a structural observation about the method. He said, what's the alternative method? She said, building while preserving what's worth preserving. Changing the structure without removing the floor from under the people standing on it. He said, that sounds slow. She said, yes. He said, the people being hurt by the current system are being hurt now, not in the timeline of slow structural change. She said, I know. She said, that's the real tension, not destruction versus preservation, the timeline of harm versus the timeline of change. He said, and you don't have an answer for that. She said, no, it's in the crossing out section of the current notebook. He said, the thing you've been stuck on. She said, yes. He said, I've been stuck on it too. She looked at him. He said, from the other direction, the people being hurt now are the reason the timeline of slow change doesn't feel like enough. They're why destruction feels necessary, not because I enjoy destruction, because waiting means more harm in the interim. She said, I know. She said, I believe you about that. He said, you do. She said, yes, I can see that it's real. He said, most people assume. She said, I know what most people assume. I don't assume things I haven't verified. He scratched his neck. He said, you've verified that it's real. She said, the anger and the urgency are genuine. The people in the League who are there because the system failed them, that's genuine. The mission as you've articulated it, the inadequacy of the current system, the urgency of addressing it, that's genuine. She said, what I haven't verified is whether the method is going to produce what you need it to produce. He said, the rubble question. She said, yes. He said, and if you verified it wasn't? She looked at him. She said, then I would want you to know. He said, why? She said, because genuine things pointed in wrong directions are still genuine, and genuine things deserve accurate information. He said, you tell me I was wrong about my method because you think I'm genuine. She said, yes. He said, that's. He stopped. He said, nobody has ever. He stopped again. She waited. He said, told me something was wrong because they thought I was genuine. It's always because they want to stop me, or because they're afraid, or because they're doing their job. She said, I know. He said, you're different. She said, I know that too. He looked at the park. He looked at the notebook in her hands. He said, page 47. She said, yes. He said, you said it resolved the structural problem. She said, yes. He said, what was the resolution? She said that the thing I was looking for externally was actually internal. The third support point was already there. I was looking for it in the wrong place. He said, the implicit support. She said, yes. He scratched his neck. He said, I need to think. She said, okay. He stood up. He said, the entry in your notebook. She said, yes. He said, you said the something underneath, the anger doesn't have a name yet. She said, yes. He said, when you find the name. She said, yes. He said, tell me. She said, okay. He walked away. She watched him go. She wrote for a long time. The last line she wrote was, the implicit support was already there. I think that's true for more than page 47. She underlined it. She did not cross it out. The meetings continued. Not every week, not on a schedule. In the specific organic way that things continued when they were real, appearing when the conditions for them appeared, when both of them happened to be in the same part of the city, when the specific quality of what the exchange provided was something neither of them was getting elsewhere. She learned things. Not operational things. She was very careful about that, and he understood the carefulness and did not push against it. She learned the things that lived in the space between the operational and the personal, the texture of what it was like to be inside the story he had been given, the specific weight of it, the way it had organized his understanding of everything including himself. He learned things too. Things that were in her notebooks and things that were not. The texture of what it looked like to approach the same fundamental problems from the inside of the system, rather than the outside. The specific limits of the inside view. The things she could see from there that he couldn't, and the things she was blind to that he had direct access to. They were exchanging angles. It was the most useful intellectual exchange either of them had ever had. It was also, they were both aware without saying it, something else. She wrote about the something else in the notebook she kept separately from the hero analysis ones. The personal notebook, the one that was more like the first version of things, unfiltered, process-oriented, honest about what was actually happening rather than what she could defend analytically. She wrote, he comes back, every time. I don't ask him to and he doesn't announce it. He just appears in the general proximity and we talk. I write things down and sometimes I show him and sometimes I don't, and he tells me things I don't think he tells other people. She wrote, I don't know what to do with that. She wrote, I know what the analysis would say. The analysis would say this is a complicated intersection of genuine intellectual exchange and two people finding in each other something they weren't finding elsewhere. The analysis would say the appropriate response is caution and documentation and careful examination of the ethical territory. She wrote, the analysis is correct. She wrote, I'm also finding that the analysis is not the only thing happening. She underlined, not the only thing happening. She wrote, Notebook 28 is going to need a new section. The break came from inside the leg. She did not know about it immediately. She found out the way she found out most things, through observation and the subsequent documentation. She found out because he came to the park one Thursday and he was different. Not the surface. The surface was the same, the hands, the red eyes, the neck scratching, the coat. The surface was constant. What was different was underneath. She had been writing for 3 minutes when she identified it. She said, something happened. He said, yes. She said, inside the leg. He said, yes. She said, do you want to tell me? He said, not yet. She said, okay. They sat. After a while he said, do you trust me? She put her pen down. She looked at him directly. She said, that's a specific question. He said, yes. She said, trust is a structural thing. It's built in layers. The foundational layer is whether I believe you're honest with me. The second layer is whether I believe you'd tell me when something relevant to me was happening. The third layer is whether I believe you'd make decisions with my well-being as a genuine consideration. She said, layer 1, yes, you've been honest in the exchanges. She said, layer 2, this is a test case. You came here today when something happened. You haven't told me what. You said not yet instead of not ever. So the layer 2 evidence is inconclusive but directionally positive. She said, layer 3, I don't have enough data yet. He said, that's a very organized answer to a simple question. She said, I have notebooks about trust. It's not a simple concept. He said, no, it's not. He said, the thing that happened. She said, yes. He said, it's not about you directly, but it involves you adjacently. She said, okay. He said, there are people in the lake who have been tracking the connection between us. She said, yes, I assumed that was happening. He said, you assumed it. She said, we've been meeting consistently for several months. The League has surveillance capacity. I would have been surprised if it wasn't tracked. He said, and you kept meeting anyway. She said, yes. He said, why? She said, because the exchange was worth the risk, and because stopping would have required pretending. I didn't find the exchange valuable, and I don't pretend things I'd have to document as inaccurate. He said, you valued the exchange. She said, yes. He said, enough to accept the risk. She said, the risk is real, I've written about it. The calculation came out the way it came out. He said, what was the calculation? She said that some things are worth the complicated. Usually the things that are most worth it are the ones that don't fit in the existing categories. He was quiet. She said, what did the League decide about the tracking? He said, there are members who want to use it. Use you, as a pressure point or as an asset. She said, and? He said, and I told them no. She looked at him. He said directly, clearly, not open to discussion. She said, how did they receive that? He said, Shigaraki doesn't usually say things are not open to discussion without a reason they understand. The reason they understand is operational logic. I gave them operational logic. He said, the reason I actually had is different. She said, tell me the reason you actually had. He said, you're not an asset, you're not a pressure point. He said, you're the exchanges. He scratched his neck. He said, I'm not explaining this correctly. She said, you're explaining it correctly. He said, I didn't want them to touch it, what we've been doing. I didn't want it to become what everything else in the league becomes. She said, operational. He said, yes. She wrote something in the notebook. He said, what are you writing? She said that you protected the exchange from becoming operational because you didn't want it to become what everything else in the league becomes. She said, that's in the notebook now. He said, the personal one. She said, yes, how did you know there was a personal one? He said, the pen speed is different. When you're writing for analysis, the pen moves fast. When you're writing something you're still figuring out, the pen is slower. She looked at him. She said, you noticed my pen speed. He said, I notice things, different from you, but still. She said, you've been observing me. He said, you've been observing me since the meat bun. It seemed fair. Something in her expression did something. He had been cataloguing her expressions across the months of meetings, and this one was new. Or not new, it existed in previous entries, but at lower intensity. It was the expression she produced when something arrived that was more than she had been expecting. She said, you've been building your own catalogue. He said, no notebooks, but yes. She said, what's in it? He said, pen speed. The way your observation is never evaluative. You never look at things with judgment, only with attention. The specific sound you make when a theory confirms. The fact that you always buy 2 meat buns and you always give the second one away. She said, you've seen me give the second one away before. He said 3 times, different people, you don't make a thing of it, you just do it. She said, it's a spare meat bun. He said, yes, that's what makes it the thing it is. She looked at him. He looked at her. The park was quiet around them. She said to Miura. It was the first time she had used his given name. He went still. She said, the name underneath the anger that I said I didn't have yet. He said, yes. She said, I found it. He said, what is it? She said, someone who was given a story that was not his, and who has been running on it for so long that it became real, and who underneath all of it still reaches for things that are genuine. The meat bun, page 47, the park, this. She said, that reaching is real, that's what's underneath the anger. He said, you put it in the notebook. She said, yes. He said, the personal one. She said, yes. He said, what else is in the personal notebook? She said, the calculation, the one where I determined that some things were worth the complicated. He said this. She said this. He looked at the notebook in her hands. He said, I need to tell you something. She said, okay. He said, the league is going to move soon. There's an operation being finalized. I haven't been able to stop it from developing. She said, tell me what you can. He said, not the operational specifics, but the direction. It's going to affect people who are not the intended targets. The structure of it has gaps that will cost people who shouldn't be paying costs. She said, the rubble question. He said, yes. She said, you've been trying to prevent it. He said, I've been pushing back on the structure of it. The internal politics of the league mean I can redirect but not stop entirely. She said, and you're telling me. He said, I'm telling you because you should know. Because the exchange we've been having means you have accurate information about the landscape, and this is part of the landscape. He said, and because I trust you with it. She said, layer 2. He said, yes. She said, you're building the layers. He said, I'm aware. She said, layer 3 is whether you'd make decisions with my well-being as a genuine consideration. He said, I told the league the exchange was not operational. I came here today to tell you about the operation. Yes, layer 3. She looked at him. She said, I'm going to tell Aizawa about the operation. not about this, not about you, but the operational direction. He said, I know. She said, and that's. He said, that's correct. That's the right thing to do with that information. I gave it to you because you'd do the right thing with it. She said, you gave me information that you knew I'd use against the League. He said, I gave you information I knew you'd use to protect people who shouldn't be paying costs. She said, those are different framings of the same action. He said, yes, they are. She said, which one do you mean? He said, the second one. She looked at him for a long time. She said, the implicit support. He said, yes. She said, it was already there. He said, I've been thinking about that since you said it. She said, what have you concluded? He said that the story I was given organized everything around the external support, around what All for One built, and what he told me the world was, and what role I was supposed to play in it. He said, and that the things that have felt most real in the past months have been things that were not part of that organization. He said, the park, the notebooks, the exchanges. He said, page 47. She said, the third support point was implicit. He said, yes. She said, it was already inside rather than outside. He said, yes. She wrote in the notebook. He said, what are you writing? She said that the story someone is given can organize everything around the wrong support point, and that finding the right one requires looking at what's actually there, rather than what the story says should be there. She said, and that this is the most important entry in Notebook 28. He said, because. She said, because it applies to more than hero analysis, and because the person across from me is finding the same thing from the inside, and we're arriving at the same page from different notebooks. He looked at her. She looked at him. The park held the specific quiet of something real having been acknowledged. He said, what happens now? She said, I don't know exactly, I know the direction. He said, what's the direction? She said, forward with accurate information, with the exchange continuing, with both of us being honest about what the exchange actually is. She said, and with whatever comes from the League operation being addressed with the information you've given me. He said, and us. She said, and us. She said, which is in the personal notebook. He said, not the hero analysis. She said, no. He said, because it doesn't fit there. She said, it doesn't fit in any of the existing notebooks. It's its own notebook. He said, how many notebooks is that now? She said, 29, if you count the new one. He said, I count it. She said, yes. He said, me too. She wrote one more line. She wrote, the direction is forward. That's the whole thing. That's always been the whole thing. She underlined it. She did not cross it out. She closed the notebook. She opened the next one. She wrote at the top, ongoing. She looked at the word. She kept it. She began. And that is the story of what happened in the park, and the convenience store, and the rain, and 29 notebooks. The story of two people approaching the same fundamental questions from completely different directions, and finding, page by page, that the directions were converging. The story of a villain who protected something real, because the something real was more important than the operational. The story of a hero student who observed before she felt and felt anyway, and wrote it down. The story of the implicit support that was already there. All along. No cap, this is one of the most complicated and real things we have ever written on this channel. And 29 notebooks proved it. Every single page. Notebook 29 filled faster than any notebook before it. She had predicted this. She had written the prediction on the first page, estimated completion, 3 weeks, and she had been right about the 3 weeks the way she was right about most things she gave serious analytical attention to. What she had not predicted was what the filling would cost. Not the writing itself. The writing was what it always was, the specific physical process of making things real enough to examine by putting them on paper. The writing was the mechanism, and the mechanism was reliable. What it cost was the specific weight of writing honestly about something that existed in the space between every category she had. She had notebooks for hero analysis. She had notebooks for tactical frameworks. She had notebooks for structural critique and institutional analysis, and the gap between what things claimed to be and what they were. She did not have a notebook for this. Notebook 29 was the notebook for this. And this was the most complicated thing she had ever tried to document. She wrote on page 1, "I am going to try to write about this honestly, without the analytical framework as a shield, without the structural language that makes difficult things feel like problems to solve rather than things that are actually happening." She wrote, "What is actually happening is this. I have been meeting with Tamura Shigaraki in a park for several months. The meetings have been honest in both directions. He told me about an operation, and I gave that information to Aizawa, and people who would have been hurt were not hurt. He knew I would do that when he told me. He told me anyway." She wrote, "I have been sitting with what that means." She wrote, "I am still sitting with it." She wrote, "It means something." She underlined, "It means something." She looked at the underline. She wrote, "The analysis says the following. The exchange has produced genuine intellectual value. The honesty in both directions has been consistent and verifiable. He has made decisions that prioritize the real over the operational on multiple documented occasions. The implicit support observation resolved something for him that had been unresolved. The personal notebook exists because no existing notebook was the right category." She wrote, "The analysis is accurate." She wrote, "The analysis is also not the point." She looked at that. She wrote, "This is the entry where I stop writing analysis and write the actual thing." She wrote, "The actual thing is that I look forward to the park on Thursday, and I have been looking forward to it since the second meeting, and I did not write that down for a long time, because writing it down would make it a thing that existed in documentation, and documented things are real in a different way than undocumented things." She wrote, "I am documenting it now." She wrote, "It is real." She closed notebook 29. She opened it again. She wrote one more line. She wrote, "He noticed my pen speed." She drew a star. Aizawa called her in on a Monday. Not unusual, she had been called in for individual assessments regularly since the first year. Her approach to training and analysis had produced a specific ongoing conversation with her homeroom teacher that was less student-teacher and more two people with different angles on the same problem working through it. This was different. She knew it was different from the quality of his expression when she sat down. He said, "The intelligence you provided last month." She said, "Yes." He said, "It was accurate. The operation you described, we were able to position correctly. The collateral damage that would have occurred was prevented." She said, "Yes." He said, "I filed it as anonymous tip. The commission did not pursue the source." She said, "I know, thank you." He said, "The accuracy was specific enough that the source had to be inside the information, not adjacent to it, inside." She said, "Yes." He said, "Midoriya." She said, "Yes." He said, "How inside?" She said, "Inside enough to have operational knowledge, but outside enough to choose to give it to me rather than use it." He looked at her. He said, "How long?" She said, "Several months." He said, "And you didn't?" She said, "I gave you the information that protected people. Every time there was operational information that required a response, I gave it to you or found the appropriate channel." He said, "What about the rest?" She said, "The rest was exchange, intellectual, structural, the gap between what things claim to be and what they are from different angles." He said, "You've been having intellectual exchange with a league member." She said, "Yes." He said, "For several months." She said, "Yes." He said, "And you're telling me this now because?" She said, "Because the commission is going to find out eventually. The league's internal politics are shifting. The specific member I've been in exchange with has been protecting the information, protecting the nature of what the exchange actually is, from becoming operational within the league. That protection is under increasing pressure." She said, "I wanted you to have accurate information before the commission constructed an inaccurate version." He said, "The member who's been protecting it." She said, "Yes." He said, "From inside the leg." She said, "Yes." He said, "At operational cost to themselves." She said, "Yes." He was quiet. He said, "How many notebooks?" She said, 29. The 29th is specifically about this. He said, "Is it analysis?" She said, "No." He said, "What is it?" She said, "Honest documentation of what is actually happening." He said, "Which is?" She looked at him. She said something I don't have a clean category for, which is why it required a new notebook. He was quiet for a long time. He said, the commission is going to want to turn this into an asset situation. She said, I know. He said, they're going to want you to extract operational intelligence. She said, I know. He said, and. She said, and I am not going to do that. He said, explain your reasoning. She said, the exchange has been honest in both directions. The honesty is the reason the exchange produced anything of value. Converting it to an asset extraction situation would end the honesty. Ending the honesty would end the exchange. The exchange is more valuable as it currently is than as an intelligence asset would be. She said, also it would be wrong. He said, that's the actual reason. She said, the actual reason and the analytical reason are the same reason approached from different angles. He said, they usually are with you. He said, Midoriya. She said, yes. He said, I'm going to tell you something outside the official framework of this conversation. She said, okay. He said, I've been teaching for a long time. I have seen a lot of students in complicated situations. Most of the time, the complicated situation is complicated because the student made a decision without adequate information. He said, you're in a complicated situation. He said, your information is the most complete of anyone I've spoken to about this. She said, yes. He said, which means you're not in the situation because of incomplete information. She said, no. He said, you're in it because of what complete information produces when you're the kind of person you are. She said, yes. He said, the kind of person who sees something real and doesn't pretend she doesn't see it. She said, yes. He was quiet. He said, I'm going to manage the commission conversation. She said, thank you. He said, it's not going to be clean. She said, I know. He said, are you going to be okay? She said, I'm always okay, that's different from always comfortable. He said, I know the difference. She said, I know you do. He said, go back to class. She said, yes, sir. She went back to class. She wrote 6 pages in notebook 29 during lunch. Thursday came. She was on the bench before him. He arrived with the specific quality he had arrived with for months. The hands, the coat, the neck scratching that she had stopped noticing as an aberration and had started noticing as him. Just him, the way he was in the world. He sat at the 2-meter distance. She said, I told Aizawa. He said, about. She said, about the exchange, not the operational content that was already filed, about the nature of it, about the months. He said, how did he receive it? She said, he's managing the commission conversation. He said, which means. She said, which means he believes the exchange has value in its current form and is protecting that assessment institutionally. He said, why would he do that? She said, because Aizawa is someone who understands the difference between what things look like and what they are, and because the outcomes, the protected people, the prevented collateral constitute evidence he can use to make the institutional argument. He said, he's using the outcomes to protect the process. She said, yes. He said, that's structurally sound. She said, I know. He said, did you tell him everything? She said, everything that was mine to tell. The exchange, the length of it, the nature of it. He said, the personal notebook. She said, the existence of it, not the contents. He said, the contents are private. She said, the contents are mine, yes. He was quiet. He said, the League internal situation has accelerated. She said, tell me. He said, there are 2 factions developing. One wants to escalate the operational tempo. The other, smaller, less established, is questioning the architecture of the mission. The rubble question from a different angle. She said, who's in the second faction? He said, people who have been paying attention to what the Notebook 19 analysis said, not because they read the notebook. Because they're living in the aftermath of previous operations and the aftermath doesn't look like what the mission said it would look like. She said, the gap between the story and the reality. He said, yes. She said, what does the acceleration look like? He said, they want to move against UA directly, large scale, visible, the kind of operation that cannot be managed with preemptive positioning. She said, when? He said they don't have a timeline yet, they're still in the planning phase. She said, but the direction is set. He said, the direction is set. She said, I need to give Aizawa this. He said, I know. She said, you know. He said, that's why I'm telling you. She looked at him. She said, Tamura. He said, yes. She said, what you're doing, inside the league, the information you give me, the protection you've been maintaining. She said, people in the league are going to notice the pattern eventually. He said, some already have. She said, and. He said, and it's becoming untenable to maintain the current position. She said, what does untenable look like from inside? He said, it looks like the moment coming where I have to choose a direction that everyone can see, not the private directions of what I tell you and what I protect, the public direction. She said, the visible choice. He said, yes. She said, what is the visible choice? He said, the league's direction or something else. She said, what is something else? He said, I don't know yet. She said, you don't know the architecture. He said, no. She said, but you know the direction of the leg is the rubble direction. He said, yes. She said, and the rubble direction produces what Notebook 19 said it produces. He said, yes. She said, which means? He said, which means the visible choice is between a direction I can't justify and a direction I haven't built yet. She said, directions can be built. He said, I know, you have notebooks about how. She said, yes. He said, you'd share them. She said, I'd share them. He said, why? She said, because the exchange has always gone both directions. He said, even now, even with this. She said, especially now, especially with this. He scratched his neck. He said, the something I was reaching for. She said, yes. He said, the things that felt real, the meat bun, the notebooks, the park. She said, yes. He said, those are the directions I don't have a story for. She said, no, they're the directions before the story, the original directions, before All for One gave you the story and you organized everything around it. He said, the implicit support. She said, yes. He said, it was already there. She said, it's still there. He said, even now, even with. She said, especially now. He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, Notebook 29 has an entry that I wrote on the first page. He said, what does it say? She said, it says what is actually happening is real. I documented it. The documentation doesn't make it more real than it was before. It just means I'm honest about it. He said, what is it? She said, you know what it is. He said, I want you to say it. She said, yes. She said, this, the exchange and the meat bun and page 47, and the park and the pen speed, and the way you protected something real because it mattered more than the operational. She said, that's what it is. He was very still. She said, I'm not asking you to do anything with that information right now. I'm not making it a demand or a condition. I'm just being honest because I write honest things down, and I said honest things to you, and this is the honest thing. He said, Notebook 29. She said, yes. He said, I'm in Notebook 29. She said, you have been since the meat bun. He said, as the main entry. She said, as the only entry that required a new notebook. He looked at the park. He looked at his hands. He said, I have done things that are not Notebook 29 things. She said, yes. He said, I'm not asking you to. She said, I know what you're not asking, and I know the weight of what you've done, and I'm not pretending I don't. She said, the weight is real, the accounting of it is real, both things. He said, and still. She said, and still the direction is the direction. She said, both things can be real simultaneously. That's what the crossing out section was about, the thing I've been stuck on, the real tension. He said, and you're not stuck on it anymore. She said, no. He said, what changed? She said, you gave me information that protected people and knew I'd use it against the League, and gave it to me anyway. You protected the exchange from the operational. You came to the park on a Thursday when something had happened inside the League and you told me. She said, the pattern is the evidence. He said, the pattern. She said, the decisions you've been making for months are a pattern. Patterns are more reliable evidence than isolated events. He said, and the pattern says. She said that the direction is real, that the reaching is real, that the implicit support was already there, and it was pointing somewhere even when the story was organizing everything around the wrong support point. He said, where was it pointing? She said, here. He said, the park. She said, yes. He said, notebook 29. She said, yes. He said, you. She said, yes. He scratched his neck. He said, I don't know how to do this. What this is, I don't have a framework for it. She said, neither do I, that's why it's its own notebook. He said, but you're not. She said, scared, no. He said, why not? She said, because I observe before I feel things about them, and I've been observing for months, and what I observe is real, and real things are not things to be afraid of. They're things to be honest about. He said, and the complications? She said, are in the notebook, all of them. I haven't pretended they're not there, I just also haven't let them be the only thing. He said, the both things simultaneously. She said, yes. He was quiet for a long time. He said, I need to make the visible choice soon. She said, yes. He said, the league's direction is the rubble direction. She said, yes. He said, and the rubble direction is not something I can justify in writing. She said, no. He said, so. She said, so the visible choice becomes clearer. He said, it's not clean. She said, no, it's the most unclean choice available. It's complicated and costly, and there's no framework for it. He said, like notebook 29. She said, yes, exactly like that. He looked at her. He said, you have directions for building something, the alternatives to the rubble direction. She said, yes. He said, would you share them? She said I would. He said, even now, even with the visible choice being what it is. She said, especially then, the directions are more useful when the choice is visible than before. He said, the notebooks. She said, I'll bring them Thursday. He said, which ones? She said, the ones about building while preserving what's worth preserving, the ones about the timeline of change versus the timeline of harm, the ones about the third support point being implicit. He said, all of them. She said, yes. He said, that's a significant amount of notebooks. She said, you've been reading my analysis since page 47. You can handle the volume. Something happened in his expression. Not the surface expression, the underneath one, the one she had been cataloguing for months and which she had written about in notebook 29 as the thing that existed below the anger. The reaching thing. The thing that had been pointing here, even when the story was pointing somewhere else. He said, Izumi. Her name for the first time. Not Midoriya, not hero student, her name. She said, yes. He said, the visible choice. She said, yes. He said, I'm going to make it. She said, I know. He said, it's not going to be clean. She said, I know that too. He said, and after. She said, after we build the architecture, the both things direction, the thing that comes after rubble and after symbols, and after all the stories that were given to people instead of grown by people. He said, you have notebooks about how. She said, I always have notebooks about how. He said, that's the whole project. She said, yes. He said, you and your notebooks. She said, you and your questions about page 47. He looked at her. She looked at him. The park held the specific quiet of two people who had arrived at a place that had not existed before they built it together page by page, and meeting by meeting and honest exchange by honest exchange. She picked up her pen. She wrote in notebook 29, the visible choice is coming, he is going to make it. The direction is the direction and the direction is here, and the both things are both real and I am writing this down, so it is documented and documentation makes things real in the specific way that real things deserve to be real. She wrote the implicit support was already there. She wrote it was pointing here the whole time. She looked at what she wrote. She wrote that's the whole entry, that's everything. She underlined it. She closed notebook 29. She opened notebook 30. She wrote at the top, building. She wrote under it, from here. She looked at the two words. She kept both. She looked at him. He was looking at the city, the way Todoroki sometimes looked at the city, with the specific quality of someone who was seeing it as something that could be different rather than just what it currently was. She said, "The notebooks I'm bringing Thursday." He said, "Yes." She said, "They start with the structural analysis, the load-bearing elements, what's worth preserving and how you preserve it while changing the things that need changing." He said, "And they build from there." She said, "Yes." He said, "Toward what?" She said, "Toward the architecture, the thing you build when the story you were given runs out and you have to figure out what's actually yours." He said, "And what's actually mine?" She said, "That's what the building is for, to find out." He said, "You'll be there for that." She said, "Yes." He said, "Even with the visible choice being what it is." She said, "Especially then." He said, "Why especially?" She said, "Because the building is more interesting than the story, and because the actual thing is always more interesting than the category it gets placed in, and because I observe before I feel things, and what I've been observing for months has been pointing in one direction." He said, "Here." She said, "Here." He scratched his neck. He said, "Thursday." She said, "Thursday." He said, "All the notebooks." She said, "All the relevant ones, there are 30 now." He said, 30. She said, "You're the reason for the jump from 27 to 30. He said, 3 notebooks. She said, "The first one is the structural analysis you already know about. The second one is the building directions. The third one." He said, "Is notebook 29. She said, "Yes." He said, "You're bringing that one too." She said, "I said I'd be honest." He said, "Even when it's complicated." She said, "Especially then." He stood up. He said, "Izumi." She said, "Yes." He said, "The meat bun." She said, "Yes." He said, "I didn't know what I was doing when I took it." She said, "I know." He said, "And then page 47. She said, "Yes." He said, "And then the park." She said, "Yes." He said, "I didn't know any of it was going to be this." She said, "Neither did I." He said, "But it is." She said, "Yes, it is." He said, "I'll be here Thursday." She said, "I know." He walked away. She watched him go. She wrote one more line in notebook 30. She wrote, "The direction is forward, with accurate information, with honest documentation, with all 30 notebooks and whatever comes after 30. She wrote, "That's the whole project." She wrote, "That's always been the whole project." She underlined it. She looked at the park. She looked at the city. She breathed. She began. The visible choice happened on a Wednesday. Not in a way that looked from outside like a choice. Visible choices rarely did. They looked like events, things that happened, rather than decisions that someone made. The decision was internal. The event was what the decision produced in the external world. The event was this. The League moved on an operation without him. Not without his knowledge, without his participation. He had declined the operational participation, and the League had moved anyway, and the operation had encountered a hero response that was significantly better positioned than the League's planning had accounted for. Nobody on the hero side knew why the positioning was good. She knew. He had told her on Tuesday. She had given it to Aizawa on Tuesday evening. The operation had failed cleanly. No civilian casualties, no hero casualties. The specific structure of failure that happened when the response was built from accurate information rather than reactive assessment. The League knew the positioning had been too good. The League knew the response had been built from inside information. The League knew it was him. He sent her a message on Wednesday evening. It was 3 words. It said, "It's done now." She wrote back immediately. She said, "Are you safe?" He said, "For now, not at the bar, I left." She said, "Where?" He said, "Working on that." She said, "Aizawa can." He said, "Not yet, not that way yet." She said, "Okay, when you're ready." He said, "The notebooks." She said, "Yes." He said, I'd like to read them. She said, I'll bring them. He said, where? She said, the park, Thursday, same bench. He said, okay. She put the phone down. She sat in her dorm room and felt the weight of what had just happened land completely. Not panic, not the compressed fear response, the full weight arriving at its accurate size. She let it arrive. She wrote about it in Notebook 30. She wrote it happened, the visible choice. Not clean, I said it wouldn't be, but real, he made it real. She wrote, the weight of it is significant. I'm writing about the weight because writing it down moves it from immediate experience to something I can examine. She wrote, what I find when I examine it is this. The pattern held. Across months of meetings and honest exchanges and information given to me, because it was right and decisions made with real things as the priority, the pattern held all the way through the visible choice. She wrote, patterns that hold through the hardest moment are the most reliable evidence. She wrote, the pattern is the evidence. She wrote, the direction is forward. She underlined it. She wrote, I'm going to the park Thursday with 30 notebooks. She drew a star. She thought for a moment. She drew 3. Thursday came. She arrived at the bench first. She had all 30 notebooks in her bag, which was heavier than usual but manageable. She had been carrying significant weight for months. She was used to it. She waited. He arrived at the 2-meter distance. He sat down. He looked at the bag. He said, all of them. She said, I said all of them. He said, 30 notebooks. She said, yes. He said, about me. She said, 3 specifically about you, 27 about everything else that the 3 are connected to. He said, you can't separate them. She said, no, that's the point. He said, the directions for building are in the other 27. She said, yes. He said, and the thing that makes the building possible is in the 3. She said, yes. He said, notebook 29. She said, yes. He said, show me. She reached into the bag. She took out notebook 29. She held it for a moment. She handed it to him. He held it. He said, you wrote this about me. She said, I wrote this about what is actually happening, which involves you. Yes. He said, honestly. She said, always. He opened it. He read. She did not watch him read. She looked at the park and the city beyond it, and the specific quality of the afternoon that was different from the afternoon of the first meeting and every afternoon in between. She listened to the sound of pages turning. He read for a long time. He closed the notebook. He held it in his hands. He said, the star. She said, yes. He said, you drew a star. She said, I draw stars on things that matter. He said, I'm in the star entries. She said, yes. He said, from the meat bun. She said, from the meat bun, yes. He was quiet. He said, you wrote that you look forward to the park on Thursday. She said, yes. He said that you documented it because documented things are real in a different way. She said, yes. He said that I noticed your pen speed. She said, yes. He said, and you drew a star next to that. She said, 2 stars. He said, why 2? She said, because you noticed something specific about me. Not the hero, not the notebooks or the analysis or the UA student. The pen speed, the specific texture of what was happening when the pen moved differently. She said, that's the kind of seeing that gets 2 stars. He said, is you me? She said, yes. He said, you saw me too. She said, yes. He said, the person before the category. She said, always the person before the category. He said, even now, even with. She said, especially now. He said, you keep saying especially. She said, because the especially is true. The things that are hard are the things that are most worth being honest about. The comfortable things don't need the especially, the hard things do. He looked at the notebook in his hands. He said, I want to give this back to you. She said, it's yours to hold for now. He said, that's not. She said, the contents are mine. The holding is something I'm choosing. You can hold it. He said, why? She said, because you just made a visible choice that was the hardest thing available, and you should have something real to hold while the aftermath settles. He said, the notebook is something real to hold. She said, yes. He held it. She looked at her bag. She said, the building notebooks. He said, yes. She said, do you want to start now, or do you need a minute with the third support point? He said, which third support point? She said, the one that's been there the whole time, the implicit one. He said, you. She said, me, yes. He said, the minute can be the reading, the building and the minute at the same time. She said, okay. She reached into the bag. She pulled out notebook 15, the structural analysis notebook, the one that had the directions for building while preserving what was worth preserving. She handed it to him. He took it. He opened it. He started reading. She opened notebook 30. She started writing. She wrote Thursday, the park, all 30 notebooks. She wrote, he is reading notebook 15, the structural analysis. He reads the way he listens, with complete attention, nothing reserved, the full quality of it going toward the thing in front of him. She wrote, the park is the same park, the bench is the same bench, the city is the same city. She wrote, everything else is different from the first meeting in the rain. She wrote, that's correct, that's the right amount of difference. She wrote, the direction is forward with accurate information, an honest documentation and 30 notebooks, and the building that comes next, and the both things that are both real and the implicit support that was always already there. She wrote, that's the whole thing. She looked at what she wrote. She added, that's everything. She underlined it. She looked at him reading notebook 15. She looked at the city. She felt the weight of 30 notebooks in a bag that was heavy but manageable, and the specific quality of a Thursday afternoon that was different from every Thursday before it because the visible choice had been made and the building was beginning. She felt all of it. She let it arrive at the correct volume. She closed notebook 30. She opened notebook 31. She wrote at the top, the architecture. She wrote under it, starting from what's actually there. She wrote under that, both things, always both things. She looked at the 3 lines. She kept all 3. She looked at him. He looked up from notebook 15. He met her eyes. He said, the 3rd chapter, the load-bearing analysis. She said, yes. He said, the thing about distributed support instead of centralized. She said, yes. He said, it works for more than institutional design. She said, I know. He said, you wrote it to work for more than institutional design. She said, I wrote it to be accurate. Accurate things tend to apply more broadly than the specific context they were written for. He said, like page 47. She said, like page 47. He went back to reading. She went back to writing. The park held them in the specific warm quality of an afternoon that was building something. The city hummed. The notebooks filled. The architecture began. And that is the complete story of Tamura Shigaraki and Izumi Midoriya. Of a meat bun in the rain and page 47 and 29 notebooks, becoming 30, becoming 31. Of the implicit support that was already there the whole time, pointing here. Of the visible choice that was the hardest thing available and the building that came after it. Of 2 people approaching the same fundamental questions from completely different directions and finding, honest exchange by honest exchange, that the directions were converging on the same page. Of the both things that are both real simultaneously. Of the direction being forward. Always forward. With all the notebooks. Every single one. No cap, this is the most layered and honest story fiction Flux has ever written. And 31 notebooks proved it. Every single page. If you made it to the very end of this complete story, then you are absolutely Fiction Flux family, and we love you for it. Please subscribe and hit that like button and share this video with every anime fan you know, because every single share helps us grow and reach more people who love these stories as much as we do. It genuinely means everything to us, and we see every one of you who watches all the way through. Drop in the comments what topic you want us to cover next, because we make these for you, and we want to know what worlds you want to explore together. See you in the next one.